I've been thinking recently about the importance of the mind body connection. And by mind body connection, what I mean is your mind and your body symbiotically being aligned with one another in a way that they communicate with each other. They're on the same wavelength and they sort of like complement one another in a way that you're not inhibiting one or the other. Because if your body isn't right or if your mind isn't right, you're throwing the other one off balance inherently. And I've been trying to sort of regain, or maybe for the first time ever, gain a really strong, solidified mind and body connection.
Yeah, I've noticed like keeping your physical body in good health is like it's been so important to me in my mental strength. Like ever since I started exercising and eating right and I lost my weight, ever since then I've also been way better with meditation and now I'm doing breath work and stuff. I mean, they say it's the mind body like connection like you said, but that's like I was talking about earlier, like dualities. That's another duality that's like transcended because the mind and body aren't separate at all. It's this, it's one. So it only makes sense that the relationship is so close between the two.
The thing is like you can definitely see if one of them um, is out of balance and out of sync. And I think in this country, especially in this culture, our bodies are I mean, they're both the big problem, but at least in my life, my body has been more of a problem for me, because my diet, I wasn't really trained as a child to eat right. So those bad tendencies sort of translated and continued into my adult life. I mean, I don't eat terribly, but my diet is not what it should be. And on the top of that, I have Crohn's disease. So for me, my body has always been a problem, and I don't want my body to be a problem anymore. I've always been in good shape. I love working out and lifting and doing all that stuff, but I don't want my body to hold me back anymore. I want my body to complement whatever's going on in my mind.
Yeah, it's like in this culture, in like American culture, if you're not like health conscious, like actively looking to be healthy, it's so easy to just slowly destroy your body. Like the average American diet is just it's ridiculous. And up until like a couple years ago, I really wasn't even conscious of it, like for the most part. I just kind of went on eating like ramen noodles, like whatever. And then like I look online, like ramen noodles cause stomach cancer. It's like, oh my goodness. Um, but yeah, you have to be, like, actively eating healthy, and what I've noticed is it's only hard to start, like, to get on that path, because once I started eating healthy, I just, like, kind of fell into a rhythm, and it's like, it rewards you, like, your body will reward you for treating it well. So I noticed myself just feeling better all the time, like more energy, like my mind was more active. I was sleeping better. So it's kind of easy to stay eating healthy once you start feeling the benefits in my experience because you start feeling so much better you don't want it to stop. So it's like you're on like a some type of a high just from putting the right things in your body. So, that's the hard thing is starting though, and I kind of fell off the wagon a little bit. I still eat healthy, but I was being very strict before, so now I wanna get back to what I was doing, just eating plants, vegetables, no sugar, no bread, no pasta, and, just some meat, like, here and there.
Another hard part about it, and it's something that also coincides with it being hard to start, is you have to retrain your reward systems to reward you for good foods as opposed to trans fats and sugar, and just having like uh the taste reward system overpower your desire, um like to eat good food.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed too once I, like, got into the routine of eating healthy that I, all the cravings stopped. Like, I stopped wanting to eat, like, donuts, bread, things like that. Like, I was just so, into the zone of what I was doing that the cravings completely went away, and, that's what, that's where everything changes really, like, when you stop even wanting all the bad stuff, um, that's when you know you're in the money.
Have you noticed a clarity of mind since you have began eating better, drinking teas and, things like that?
Yeah, 100%. And like I mentioned, like, also my sleep, that's a big thing. Cause like, for most of my life, I've had horrible sleep. Like, my adult life, I just always had problems sleeping. Now I sleep great. Like I've mentioned in previous episodes, like, I'm dreaming and things that, like, used to not really happen so much. But definitely clarity of mind and, um, even I don't know, I can't really credit this to eating well, but it's just something that came along with it, so maybe, but, also meditating came easier to me. It started being a little more natural and less strenuous, and, thinking about it, it could be because of diet. Like, if you're eating the wrong things, your body isn't relaxed, like, it's sometimes a little anxious and fidgety, so, yeah, I think, overall, it just helped me with everything.
Yeah, and clarity of mind equals, clarity of meditation. Anything that is consciousness work is probably going to be propelled by a good diet anyway.
Yeah, and also just like a positive mentality in general, which helps with meditation, helps with anything. Just less anxiety, less like, and all that stuff comes with eating well. Like, it's less inflammation. And I didn't know, but inflammation causes like depression and anxiety and things like that. So all that stuff started to slowly fade away. And I think the exercising is huge too, which I have stopped working out all the time, but, I'm getting back to it. I've worked out a little bit recently, but I want to get back to 5 days a week, like a strict schedule. So I've kind of fallen off on that, but that's uh that's time that I have to get back to doing that more.
Now, my biggest issue is what you just said, inflammation. Having Crohn's disease, having an autoimmune disease, it's essentially caused by inflammation in the colon, and my body senses the stricture that is there and attacks it, and that makes it worse when you attack something that's already inflamed. Um, It'll cause like leakages, and it causes just all types of shit to go wrong within your digestive system. And Crohn's is a really weird one because it affects everything from like your mouth to your asshole, like every single aspect from top to bottom of your digestive tract, everywhere the food possibly can go. My very first symptoms ever actually were hemorrhoids when I was 15, and then mouth sores, mouth sores were another one. I don't get that anymore. I haven't had a hemorrhoid since I was diagnosed, and I don't really get mouth sores either. It's centralized itself within this stricture I have in my colon, um, and I have a plan to try to do my best to minimize or to shrink the stricture, or not to shrink it, but to minimize the inflammation that's around the stricture, in hopes to get rid of it. And it's nice because I get colonoscopies like every 2 years or so. And I just had one sort of recently. So I have a long time in between now until my next one. So the best way to gauge any kind of like holistic method of healing is to see how it affects you, the scientific tests that are being done on you. And this is the test essentially that is what tells me everything. They see it all. They go all the way up and they see everything. So with that next colonoscopy that I get, I'm hoping to have a clearer view of a path toward healing myself.
Right, which is what's your path will entail, cleaning up the diet, eating healthier. I mentioned fasting. That's a good thing that to try. I've heard that will help, and meditation for healing. So yeah, I know that you started listening to Joe Dispenza, and I I've heard good things about him. I believe that the methods will work. I think that with the right frame of mind and being stringent and doing everything properly, I think it will work because this goes back to the mind body connection. Like the question that's always asked, like, is the body in the mind or is the mind in the body? I mean, that's like a question science is always asking. And, I think that it could be like a bit of both even, but I think that they're so tied, like united, that I think the mind can do incredible things. Like we were talking about earlier, the placebo effect. Like there's no way to explain the placebo effect. There's very crazy instances of the placebo effect doing wild things. And there's just really no way to explain it other than that your mind has so much more power than we give it credit for. Like we kind of just brush the placebo effect to the side, but it's used in like every study, and it's like a very important control aspect of experiments, and it always works. I don't know. It's a wild thing. So I think with knowing that and the new insights I've gained on reality, I think the method seems like it'll work.
I'm reading Joe Dispenza's book, You Are the Placebo, currently, and there's a lot in there, and there's a lot of stuff that to normal ears sounds pretty incredible and unbelievable. But I'm just taking everything with a grain of salt, listening to the science, and I'm just gonna give it a try. I mean, and like you said, meditation is a big part of it. Um, his his approach to meditation is essentially connecting yourself with like a conscious agent that has effects to the physical world, and these effects can range from um, healing inflammatory bowel disease, other types of inflammation like arthritis. And you can also heal your mind of psychological traumas and things like that. I mean, like all types of meditation. And you look at other cultures that use like plants and meditation in conjunction to heal both physical and mental ailments, which is an interesting aspect of it. And yeah, the placebo effect is outrageous. I mean, it's so outrageous that, like you said, we literally had to account for it in every single clinical trial when it comes to drugs because it's so prevalent that, like, we absolutely must count how many people are just improving via the placebo effect as opposed to having the actual drug. And you see in a lot of these trials that people will recover from ailments that seem impossible strictly on a sugar pill, which is it's amazing to me.
It's funny to me that we find that so unbelievable because it doesn't fit our paradigm in the West. And in the West, we always laugh and poo poo on like Eastern medicine and all these like holistic methods of healing. And we're on our high horse, like laughing at it when we are by far the least healthy group of people to ever exist. Like, and we're sitting here like, ha, we know everything about health when, I mean, just look at our population. It's sad. And if you want to get in the conspiracy aspect of it, I mean, you could look at the pharmaceutical industry, how much money is made on pharmaceuticals. Why would they want you to know that you could heal yourself if you switch your paradigm and do something? If you don't believe it can happen, it won't. That's what I believe. And like, I think reality is mind. I think that's the nature of reality. And the paradigm that I'm living from today would allow for that type of healing to happen. Cause like I told you that I started doing breath work like 2 weeks ago. And I've been doing this new breath work. I have never done it before. And like I'll do the breath work for like 15 minutes and then meditate after for like 20 minutes to a half hour or so. And I had a health issue, uh, and I've noticed it starting to go away. And I've had this for over a year now, and I was trying all sorts of stuff, and it just wouldn't go away. I have like a lump, and this lump will not go away. I've tried so many things putting on this lump, and, um, and then suddenly after doing this breath work, it just started shrinking, and doing the meditation, I was, like, blown away by it. Now I'm continuing to do it, and it's shrinking. It's really wild. I don't have any other way to explain it, but I go into my meditation and my, breath work, like, with the intention, and, like, sometimes I'll, like, repeat a mantra, like, "I am healing," or something like this, and it's seems to be working for me, which is really insane. Um, yeah, so I never had the belief that this could be a possibility. I was the same as most people, where I would, like, kinda laugh this type of thing off and just find it absolutely ridiculous, holistic healing, meditation healing, this type of thing. Um, but ever since, I started having to, reevaluate my view of reality, and straight up, I'm just living through a different paradigm now, looking at reality differently, just not like a physical, mechanical machine system or something. I'm looking at it differently, and now I think it's allowing new possibilities in my life.
I'm not sure I mentioned this, but I actually had this strange lump develop on the back of my ear, and I was like, "What the fuck is this thing?" Like it had mass to it. It felt like there was something like under my skin, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And I started taking cold showers with breath work in the shower because when you voluntarily expose yourself to cold, your body wants to breathe heavy and it wants to do like essentially like a Wim Hof like breathwork exercise to get through the traumatic situation of being in cold water because your body doesn't want to be there. And I've noticed that since I started doing the cold showers, this thing has shrunk like 90% and it's almost gone. So I wonder if there's some sort of validity. Well, I mean, it seems like there is some sort of validity to these things.
Yeah, I think there absolutely is. And like I said, it seems crazy just because it doesn't fit the paradigm that we were indoctrinated into.
And why are we lumpy, by the way?
Yeah, I don't know. But it doesn't fit the paradigm we're indoctrinated into. Like, I'm truly now starting to believe that almost anything is possible with the power of the mind. I mean, I think there's things that can happen that, I mean, honestly, especially after doing like DMT, that pretty much showed me that anything is possible. Um, just psychedelics, they'll open your mind. And now I'm definitely in a different camp than I was a couple years ago. Um, and I've validated a lot of things for myself. Whereas I walked around life, my whole life, up into my adult life, walked around just thinking I knew things by appealing to authority and just taking the word of science as gospel without ever doing science or validating anything. So now I'm looking at things in the sense of the only way I can know something is by validating it myself. And I've noticed that when the beliefs change, the reality changes with it.
I think there's a really interesting quote that um, applies here. I've been reading Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. Have you heard of him?
Nah.
There's a quote that's prevalent throughout this book, and it is what the knower knows, the prover proves. And I think that's perfect. You know, you can use that in any paradigm, and you can see that, like, when you know something and you use any human method to prove it, you're going to prove what you know, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with it though.
Well, it's more or less what you just said. Like, there's a bias in claiming to know,
Mhm.
and when you look to prove that thing, you're going to prove what your mind thinks is valid.
Right. Okay. I got you. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I thought you were kind of the reason I rejected it first is because I was thinking, my initial thought was that all things true aren't provable. So that's a thing that we also, I think, mix up a lot as a culture. We think that something has to be provable to be true, but truth precedes proof. So some things just aren't able to be proven. Um, but now as a culture, since we're, you know, so dependent on science for our knowledge, we kind of base everything off of that idea that it has to be proven to me for me to believe it. Um, Self-validation isn't even as important as the proof. We wanna see a paper that's peer reviewed, even if, you know, I've never done the experiment. That's what it takes for people to believe something is true now, I've noticed, and that's what I kind of flipped the script on. So, I gotta prove it to myself. Like I mentioned the other week, I can't even claim that the earth is round. Do you know what I mean? I can't claim that. Um, I would say if we're being honest, 99% of people can't claim that. Um, yeah, we don't know as much as we think we know, and I think that's an important thing to know. Like, because then you can really start to open your mind to more possibilities and more capabilities. I think that it's kind of a beautiful thing to admit that you don't know what you thought you had. The possibilities open up, and then it gives you a little more curiosity to investigate and discover for yourself what the truth of reality actually is.
'Cause it's more complex and more interesting than we know. Terrence McKenna, I like to quote people. He said, "Reality is not just weirder than you suppose; it's weirder than you can suppose." And I love that because again, and it even kind of brings to the forefront, like again, like we talk about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. No matter where you stand from, there's always going to be an aspect of reality that's unprovable, and that's weirder and more insane than you ever thought possible.
We use a lot of systems and methods to try to prove things like the big ideas, the big questions. Um, and this is why my belief is that science as it stands today won't be able to answer the really large questions of existence because kind of the same with girls' incompleteness theorem, like it's a partial system or and a partial method. So I don't think it has the ability to evaluate the whole or teach us the whole because it's partial and it always well we can get truth from it, valuable truth from these methods, but not never whole truths, I don't think, because what we're always left with is partial truths with more questions. And I think that the only way to discover the answers to the big questions of God, existence, just knowledge of the self, things like that, it's interesting because I think the only way is literally by looking within. And it's funny because not very many people in the West do this, and I think it goes along with what I've been saying. It's just the way our we've been indoctrinated through culture. We don't see the value in looking within. We don't value that. We always look outside for answers, outside for pleasures, outside for validation. All this, and I think just this whole method that we've been using for so long in our culture it has to be a huge factor and even like, you know, the mental health crisis and, you know, the addiction crisis, things we have going on in like American culture because we stopped valuing ourselves as a barometer of truth and we stopped looking within for answers and looking inward to, you know, solve our problems.
Because the scientific paradigm that we've been working under for as long as we have is a great predictor for how, but you have to look inside to understand why. Science doesn't have an answer for why. It never has. And I've had um mushroom experiences, quite a few actually, where I'm just kind of like this the word why is just repeating in my mind. Why? Why? And like it's almost redefining the word for me so that I can properly understand how to approach why. Because we don't have a method of approaching the why for anything. It's always just we look externally and see the how. And it's great for certain things because when you understand how things work, you can make things, you can produce things, and you can accustom yourself to luxuries and you can live a beautiful physical life. That's great. It's wonderful. But without a proper foundation of why, I think technology and science can become misplaced. It's almost as if this paradigm of how has been a stand-in for our lack of understanding why, because it's led to so many producible effects in our life, so many things that we can attach ourselves to physically.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a snowball now, so it's just getting bigger and bigger, and we're continuing down this same path. And it's funny because it's exactly true. Like that science answers the questions of the how, but not the why. And that's where I think it's it's kind of a bad thing that religion is dying, because that's like another aspect of the duality of science and religion. So they're not so different. People think of them as polar opposites, but they're asking the same question. It's just one is asking how and one is asking why. Religion being asking the why. But since we've fallen so deeply into the how, religion has become so corrupt, and it's not even pointing to the same thing the ancient texts were pointing at. It's become completely different. Like people now think of Christianity as like God being a man in the sky, which it never was that. It's just bastardized now. Basically all religions are, for the most part. And so now we've even lost that, and we're so lost on the whole why aspect. So I think it's important that now we start looking within. I think that it's such a beautiful thing to realize that you are the answer. It's not looking to someone else, but the answer is you. And psychedelics are just incredible for this. So it's like I like how you described your that mushroom trip, saying like just why, and then it'll like recontextualize it into a way you can understand. And that's the beautiful thing about psychedelics is like you can have like awakenings or experiences of knowledge, downloads, whatever you want to call them, that just transcend everything about reality as we know it in language. Because like language is very limited, and it's dualistic in nature. I mean, that's the only way we can communicate with dualities. And if reality is non dual, as I believe it to be, how are you going to get any of those truths through language or through someone else? They can't be communicated through a dualistic language. They can be pointed at through dualistic language. So the only way to get those answers is looking within and having just an awakening experience, something that just kind of blows your mind and speaks to you in a way that you didn't know possible.
And that brings to mind another problem with the paradigm we're living in. It's that we don't think there's any other way to learn something than someone telling you, than you going to school and having an authority teach you. We don't really take to the fact that you can learn something from an experience or learn something from a plant or be guided by someone to learn something for yourself. We think of things as it's a binary. Either you know or you don't. It's fact or it's fiction. Um, in schools we take tests and there's only one answer to each question. And if you're right, you're right, and you're wrong, you're wrong. And we're judged in that way, which creates a psychological conditioning where we don't know how to learn any other way. That's why we just seek out authority figures to teach us, as opposed understanding that we can learn from going inside. And that's how you find the why.
Yeah, and we're rewarded for parroting the cultural norm of the time. I mean, you're not rewarded for thinking outside the box and saying something that may be controversial. Like it's you get ridiculed, you get laughed at. I mean, it's far easier to just learn what is already known and then repeat it and then get rewarded for that, rather than stick your neck out and say something that nobody else is going to understand, other than like maybe a small group of people that are on your same wavelength. Um, that's why I think it's so important that, I mean, if I were in charge of like education, then I'd say when kids are in elementary school, there should be an epistemology class from elementary to high school to college. Like that should be a mandatory. And it's just mind blowing that it isn't. It's not even talked about. Most people don't even know what it is. So epistemology is like, how do you know anything at all? Like the knowledge of knowledge. How do you know something? And see, the importance of that is it can teach kids how to think, not what to think. It allow them to know what they know, rather than just kind of falling in line. Because I never learned any of that growing up, no epistemology. And I just started learning it in like the last 2 years, and it changed everything in my life. Like epistemology is like also completely intertwined with metaphysics and spirituality. Like it's a huge deal, and it's something that is completely ignored because it's not valued. Like they don't need a population of people that think for themselves and verify their own truths. I mean, who am I to say? It might not be best for a culture, but I think it would be. But in the eyes of the people in power, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, and the power structure, again, we can go back to what we were talking about earlier, like the pharmaceutical industry not wanting to, you know, give people the knowledge that they can heal themselves in other ways. I've taken lots of different kinds of pills, and they haven't worked for my illness, and I get infusions now. So they make, I think, like 5 grand per infusion. So if I'm sitting there in the room and there's 4 people in there, like, you know what I mean? They're making 20 grand off just one day, one morning. So of course, the systems of power are not going to want people, um, to explore these types of things. But it's also very possible, and I think this is actually the case, that the system has run so rampant that the people who are working for the pharmaceutical industry, the people who are doing, this and that, XYZ, don't even know. It's not as if there's some sort of like cohort by Pfizer to like, minimize everyone's knowledge of meditation. I think they just aren't aware. And I think it's more likely that we're all just running around on this planet trying to figure things out, trying to do things right, and a lot of people are super misguided.
Yeah, and I would say you're right that like especially the people who are like at head of Pfizer and this and that. Those people are so profit driven, and they're winning so hard in this system that they have no reason to even take a second to believe anything could be another way. They have to reinforce this reality to themselves day in and day out, reinforce it as hard as they can so they can cling to it, you know? They don't want anything to change. Like people are what they fear most is the unknown. So they're going to just continue to push this system. I do think that there is some sort of concerted effort to keep this stuff out of the public. I mean, to me, it just seems like, first off, the banning of psychedelics. Like, they have to know what they do by now. All the studies they've done with them, all the like weird secret programs they've used, people just using them in general. I mean, knowing that they're safe, knowing that they're not like any other drug. They're not even drugs, if you ask me. It's not a drug, it's a tool for like to open up reality. It's like a truth seer. Like, it's just insane. And I think it benefits people to just keep everything as is, like the people in power and whatnot. I think that there is some type of effort to hide these mystical truths from people. In my opinion, it's just too big to be something that is ridiculed and laughed at. I always think of like the UFO topic in the same like sense. Like UFOs are now being like we're being told that they're real, but for the longest time there was an effort to disinform the public and make it a topic of ridicule. Um, I've seen the government do that type of thing, and whoever is in power, they use that as a method to keep people in line and stay inside the paradigm that they belong in, according to the people controlling it. I do agree. I think that it's mainly ignorance. People just don't know. They don't have the time to think about it. They're just so wrapped up in this rat race and just living their lives. I think that's a huge part of it. But to me, it seems like this is so powerful that it has to be quieted or else more people would know. It's the only game in town, you know? And the amount of people who know this type of thing are actively seeking truth in this manner, or the amount of people that I would think would be interested in this would be a much larger percentage than it is now.
It's exploding though. I mean, it's growing exponentially. And now you have that show, How to Change Your Mind, the documentary show on Netflix based off Michael Pollan's book. And that's huge right now. I mean, these things are, it's coming back. And it's getting to a point where, similar to the UFO UAP phenomenon, it's going to be undeniable at some point, and they're going to have to acknowledge its undeniability.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I think the internet is the reason why all this is happening. And like even with the UFO thing, I think that, people are going to find out now, so they have to get on it so they have, a control of the narrative in some way, or they can say, like, look, we didn't lie completely, this type of thing. But you're right, it's definitely exploding, and there's no stopping it now. But ironically, it's still ridiculed in like the scientific community and things like this. So I see it now in the mainstream, especially being used for like mental health, and that's huge now. But with science, I don't see it being talked about seriously as far as like the metaphysical applications of it and like discovering the way the universe actually works. I still think because we're in the materialist paradigm, they look at it as just a hallucination, an experience that isn't real, when I think it should be used in a more serious way to hopefully shift the paradigm to understanding that the world isn't material as we thought it was, and the experiences are real, just as real as anything that happens. Um, they'll call it a hallucination. And I think hallucination is it's a great word though, because what it means hallucination is a vision with nothing behind it really. So a vision that is that has nothing behind it. So I'd say reality itself is a hallucination. I mean, reality is the groundless ground. I mean, what are we? You can zoom in forever. It, it's all basically hallucination. It's an illusion.
I think the medical model is fine. It's like science is dipping its toes into psychedelics within the realm that it can do so. Because science doesn't really approach metaphysics, it doesn't really try to approach spirituality. So, if we can get these things through our system via the medical model, then I mean, personally, I don't see much of a problem with that because it's the way that things sort of begin. And again, it's like science isn't dipping its toes into a water that it shouldn't be dipping its toes into. It's sort of sticking to the paradigms in which it has control and in which it can produce results. And we're seeing some of the most amazing results medically from the clinical trials of MDMA. In other countries, are using LSD and psilocybin, and it's amazing what you're seeing happen. You're seeing real, true transformations. People able to address their traumas in a way that was impossible before. A lot of the participants of these clinical trials are people that have traumas that are so deep that the normal person can't relate. Like, these are traumas of like watching people that you care about in front of you die, and things like that. Like some really really deep seated problems people have that they're able to sort of extract and approach in a way that's productive. So I think that the medical model is fine. I think there's a lot of use there, and it seems to be like the entry point.
Yeah, I agree with that. And no, I'm not trying to really downplay the medical aspect. It's fantastic. I mean, they give psilocybin to people who are dying, like they're going to die in a couple months, and suddenly they don't fear death. I mean, what is that? You have to think that's huge. I mean, you spend your entire life fearing death, and then you have an experience, and suddenly you just lose the fear of death. And I think a lot of people have the same feeling and experience that I have, which is the feeling that they aren't the physical body, that they are something more, and that they are eternal. And they're reassured that death is just an illusion. It's not the end. It's just this dream isn't it just cuts this dream. Or who knows, maybe it repeats. I don't know. But it's really the medical stuff happening with psychedelics is incredible. I am excited and waiting for it to break through into science as far as the metaphysics of it and all this. So I think then the real transformation happens when science starts taking it seriously and the paradigm shifts. I mean, I imagine the technology that can be made when human beings understand consciousness, like really understand it. Whereas, now for the past 100 years, it's just been pushed to the side. It's just considered a problem. It's not really investigated. Now it's being investigated. So I have hope that soon there will be huge breakthroughs and then hopefully it'll bleed out into the culture and people will start to understand like, hold up, wait, all this that we've believed to be true isn't necessarily the case. It takes a lot of like scientists, unfortunately, to die, like people of the old generation to die off to allow a new paradigm to exist. And I think that it's coming, like, probably the next generation because it's so big now, and you got guys like Donald Hoffman investigating, like, a real credible guy, really making a case for consciousness being fundamental. I think you're gonna have a lot more people following his tracks, and I just think it's gonna be incredible when that becomes the norm, the common knowledge, like, the reality that we live in. And the technology that's gonna come along with that is gonna be mind bending.
Yeah, and going back to the Michael Pollan show, the one issue that I sort of have with it, and so in his book, the book that this is based off of, he goes on a lot about what he says is the use of psychedelics for the betterment of well people, which means people like that don't have any medical illness, they don't have psychological issues, but they can take psychedelics and they can better their life from them. And the show, I know I hadn't watched the last episode yet, but the show is pretty much strictly involved with the medical model. And there's like some indigenous stuff in there, there's some history and they talk about Maria Sabina and they talk about the way that, these things were synthesized and discovered. But it's a lot of the experiential stuff is really based off of the medical model, which again, I think is fine. But I really can't wait until it's considered for the betterment of well people as well.
Yeah. I have not seen the show yet. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they go into like the indigenous stuff. I mean, they it's interesting. They seem to keep like just an arm's distance to like the thing of it, like the real truth of it. So it's acceptable medically, which is a good sign because it wasn't. I mean, think about it 15 years ago, that would seem pretty crazy, but now it's mainstream, medically used. People are at least like common folk instead of being afraid of mushrooms and thinking that they're gonna rot their brain away. They're like, "Oh, do you hear that? Psilocybin can cure depression." Like people that never were talking about it before are now talking about it, which is a good thing. But I hadn't seen the show, but I figured that would be pretty much the case, because especially the scientists that are, like, looking into this, like, they're brave because they're gonna get ridiculed in their community. It's not like a thing taken seriously by most hard scientists. So even if they know the truth and they're still gonna be cautious on the way they report it. I don't think that many scientists are going to jump out screaming about God, that they found God through a psychedelic. I think they're going to be cautious to say that. And I wouldn't be surprised if many of them did, but they're going to be cautious with their words and the way it's presented.
And I mean, going along the lines of how it's presented, you have to also realize that in order for Netflix to pick up the show, it has to adhere to certain protocols. And I think there are essentially two types of shows that are going to get picked up by Netflix when it comes to psychedelics. And that's a show like Have a Nice Trip, which I haven't seen yet, but I saw the preview and it made me sick because it was essentially just like a bunch of idiot celebrities talking about how they saw elephants and they saw rainbow coming out of their piss and things like that. And the other side of that is the medical model. So it's like there's if you had a show where you made it all about the spiritual aspect of it and the astral projection and like the beautiful spiritual experiences you can have, the only network that's going to pick that up is probably Gaia, and then you're going to have like an outcasted show. So I understand the way that they're approaching these things because they sort of have to ease it into the culture in a way that's digestible for normal people.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I hadn't seen that either. What was the other Netflix?
It's called Have a Nice Trip, I
Right,
believe.
I saw like a preview or snippet of that, and I feel the same way. I was like, "This is not how this should be represented." Like, I always tell people who are interested in psychedelics that it's not recreational, first of all, so stop pushing it as a recreational drug or something silly or fun. It shouldn't be presented that way, but I totally understand why they do it. Get some celebrities on the TV and people will watch. And, as far as, like you said, the only people who are gonna take it seriously is as far as networks go, will be Gaia. And unfortunately, like you said, it's so fringe. So the people who are seeing it already know. Like, if you have Gaia and you're getting into Gaia and you're watching it, you're probably already pretty open-minded and into some strange things. But the cool thing about, like, just if you look through history, like the huge innovations and like the real paradigm shifts always come from the fringe. It never comes from the mainstream out. It's always like some weird Einstein or some like mystic scientist. Like a lot of these huge paradigm shifting science discoveries happen from scientists that were like mystics and just really strange and doing things outside the box. So I think that, the innovation, the paradigm shifts, all this stuff comes from the fringe, from the outside in. So that's a good sign to see that the fringe is doing the work.
Yeah, it's always come from the fringe. It's always come from, as Alan Watts says, the black sheep in the family. You know, it's the rascal. That's why I love that. Whenever I think Alan Watts says that a lot, and also Ram Dass, you know, they really exemplify their rascality, and I think it's important to see. Then it's important to realize about yourself.
Yeah, it makes so much sense too, because it's just so easy to be a cog in the system and just kind of go along with what everyone is doing because it's amazing. Like, if you look at humanity, it's like we're just like a hive mind, basically. Like, if you can get an entire population of people to believe something that isn't true at all. Like, and it's just, to me, it's very interesting the way human beings behave because I see the behavior in myself. Like, I walk around, I don't do it as much now, and because I'm trying to work on myself, but I would walk around just like pompous, like just so logically driven, like just depending on my logic so much and thinking I know so many things that I've realized now I don't know. I've just fallen in line and believed them. Like, I just repeated what I was told and then thought I was smarter than other people who didn't remember it. You know what I mean? Like, just parroting, things I've read or things that I've learned in school. And now I kind of feel like a jackass when I start doing the work and actually trying to independently verify things and discover truths on my own. And I'm realizing that most of the stuff that I thought I was being so logical about and so smart, like, just doesn't seem to be the case. I can't verify it for myself. And I'm actually finding out that reality is just far different than I thought it was. Like, I was so wrong about so many things. And that's like going back to what I said before. I think that's why epistemology should be taught to people so they don't have to go through, 25 years of just inaccurate thinking.
It's the cosmic wink, when you transcend your initial paradigms, you observe the cosmic wink, where it winks at you and it tells you that you don't know anything and that all your previous assumptions are just little tiny inklings of, how you describe the world within, your paradigm and your physical senses. And I love the cosmic wink. It always makes me laugh because it makes me laugh at myself. I love that.
It taught me to also, trust my intuition more, um, rather than just putting all my faith into logic. Um, it's funny because, like, it's also learning about relativity changed everything for me. Like, logic, I always took it as an absolute. Like, logical is logical. But logic is a relative term. Like, it's not an absolute thing. Like, what was logical 100 years ago isn't logical today. What is logical here in the United States isn't logical in the Congo. You know, they all have different ideas of what's logic. Like, what is logic is going to be different depending when and where you are. And, plenty of people, even in the same culture, can't agree on it. But we all walk around thinking our logic is the right logic. And now I know that logic is just a tool rather than an absolute that I can put all my faith into, was I used to do. Um, Now I can see it's just a tool and it's very relative. So the best thing to do with logic is basically use it as with discretion and also gain as many perspectives as possible, like gain as many perspectives as possible from what other people think is logical. And then understand that even though you may have laughed at it in the past, their idea of what's logical is just as valid as yours.
And also, yeah, we look at the past logic and we laugh at it. And the only difference between past humans and us is our technology. We are literally the same thing. We haven't changed much in 20,000 years. So when you're laughing at the past, all you're doing is you're creating a paradigm in which you then laugh at other people that exist during your time, like people who are indigenous, people who have different views than you, instead of collectively trying to absorb the information from all avenues and all aspects of life. You're just taking your paradigm and you're looking at the past and you're saying, well, that wisdom wasn't good enough because, oh, they didn't have the technology we do. They don't have the perspective that we do. And that applies, you extrapolate that toward everyone. And then you just create this like infectious paradigm of mindless judgment on things you don't understand, as opposed to having a method based in wonder and curiosity.
Yeah, all the while not realizing all those perspectives are just as valid as your own. It's like every person walks around thinking that they got it, they understand, but those people, they don't understand. But from their mind, they're thinking the same thing. Like every perspective is the reality of the person that's living it. So I think that it's important to understand that and treat perspectives as like different perspectives, not as something that you hate or push away or ridicule, but something that you can dive into and gain, like gain as many perspectives as you can. Cause like in a sense, you could say that's what the universe is doing. I mean, it's just split itself into as many perspectives as possible and is exploring itself. And for some reason, like as people, we think that we are the ones that are correct. And like as far as laughing at people of the past, like it's we should know that the same thing is gonna happen to us. Like we can't be laughing at other perspectives from the past when we know that in the future the same thing will happen to us. You know what I mean?
And also, along with that, it's like when you're looking back on the past and you're judging that, it's almost like um, if you know calculus and you look back on algebra and like dividing fractions and you're saying, oh, that's nonsense. But these things build on each other. Like the reason that we think what we do now and the reason we have everything we do now is because of the past. The past has built the future. So you can't just deny the past and say, "Oh, that's illegitimate. That's bullshit." Just because trigonometry exists doesn't mean that algebra is any less valid. It's just been built on each other. You have to appreciate the past, and sometimes you got to go back to algebra. You got to go back to fractions, and you have to revisit that shit so that you can properly understand where you are and where you're going.
Yeah, like, we had to go through that to become what we are, and like you said, revisiting, like, going back to have to reevaluate. Because another thing, we treat facts as just absolute truth. Like, there's a fact, and that's the way it is, and that's it, without realizing that that's not the case. Like, facts are interpretations. There's there's countless ways to interpret the same fact. That's why people have so many different perspectives. Like, the fact is an interpretation. And the way that you ask the question also matters. It's going to change the way that you answer it. So, I think people look at facts too rigidly, and what I'm trying to do is see them more as interpretations. And also, like, when it comes to revisiting the past, like, we may have misinterpreted one of those facts, and I think that we did. I think that they're gonna understand that there's been a ginormous blunder, and we've been building on top of a pile of shit. Like, we've been going in a direction that is pragmatic, that, produces results as far as material objects and technologies, but just because something works doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean it's the way that it actually is. Things can work without being absolutely true. So I think we're going to have to look back and understand that we misinterpreted a lot when it comes to the nature of reality itself. And especially the fact that you know, in mainstream science, that we don't take metaphysics into account and kind of treat that as pseudoscience. When all pseudoscience is it's science. It's just science that's not investigated or taken seriously. I don't like that term. I think it's like people call an idealist like pseudoscience, or like even just the investigation of consciousness, psychedelics, meditation. Oh, that's all pseudoscience. I think that we're gonna have to change our interpretation on that, and I think in the future we're gonna realize that psychedelics and meditation aren't pseudoscience. That it's the science of the self. It's the science of consciousness.
Yeah, it's about understanding the why that is the foundation of the how. And again, to bring it back full circle, that starts by solidifying the mind body connection.
Yeah, and I think with the mind body connection, we have to figure that problem out as a culture. Um, is the mind in the body, or is the body in the mind? I think that's a question that needs to be thought about more.
Yeah, and maybe just thought about inconclusively. Because again, when you're breaking things down into a duality that isn't a duality, I like to think of the body and the mind as like if you ever have you ever seen those blankets that are sewn. Um, they're like string blankets that are sewn beautifully. If you look at one side of it, like it's an image. I bought these some of these blankets. I bought two of them. If anyone knows who Alex Gray is, he's an exceptional visionary artist, and he sells these beautiful blankets on his website, and they're amazing. I mean, they're representations of his art, but they're sewn together by individual pieces of string, and they're amazing. But the back of them, it's a mess. It's a mess of color, and and you can't tell what the image is. And that's almost like what our body and our mind is like, or even like what the inside and the outside of our body is. It's one piece. And in order for the beauty on the outside to exist, the inside, the flip side has to exist as well. That goes with our mind body connection. And you can also use that analogy for the body itself, how we have this outside of our body. If I have pimples on my head or I have a cut on my face, that's something that's on the outside I consider. But the inside of your body is the same thing. It's part of the same thing, even though it's like ugly and it looks like shit. It doesn't have the nice form of skin and this defense mechanism, this armor we have, the hair and whatever. all the things that we define as outer beauty of the human. Uh, Without the inside mess, the outside couldn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well put. Um, Unfortunately, though, it seems that as a culture and as a society, we already made up the distinction that the mind is in the body. Like, that's how everybody walks around thinking. That's truth based on our culture. Personally, I don't see it that way, and I think that, like, that's a duality that transcends to mind with a capital M. So, they are one, but it transcends to absolute, basically, mind, the nature of reality itself. And I think that if people thought about it a little deeper, that maybe they should start to question the idea of the body being in the mind. And yeah, this might be a little off topic, but I was thinking about this the other day. Just basically thinking about what what you can and can't know, and it was like a pretty crazy thought is that you can't know. It's not possible to know that anyone else is conscious. Like you can't know that anyone else is conscious. Like, and then you could think about it a little deeper too. Like in your dreams, are other people conscious? You probably assume that they're not, that it's just you. But could it be the same for reality? I mean, is it all just you?
How could you know if you're not in a waking dream, which is like, yeah, the basis of a lot of stuff that we talk about. Like, are we in a dream? Is this like maybe an equivalent to what we're doing when we're sleeping?
Well, it's like when you're in a dream, you think that the person you're talking to is conscious. You think they're another conscious person. Same as I assume right now that you're conscious, even though there's no possible way I could know that you are. And then you wake up and you're like, "Oh, they weren't conscious. That was just me." And when you think about that, that's reality in a nutshell, like capital M me. I mean, that's the oneness.
And the reality of some dreams too, like to go along that aspect, like, man, if you've ever been sleeping next to your significant other, the person you love, and you have a dream that they just betrayed you on a level that's so deep and it cuts you to the core, and you wake up and you look over at that person and you're like, "You motherfucker." And they're just sleeping peacefully, you know? They've done nothing to you, but these types of dreams can be so real and so powerful that you wake up pissed off. And sometimes it'll take you a few minutes to calm down.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think we've all had those. Um but I take it as they are real. I mean, when you're experiencing it, it's real. And see, the crazy thing about it is you wake up and you're like, "Oh, that wasn't real." But when you're in it, it feels real. It is real. And then when you realize you're dreaming, it still is real. Like when you become lucid in the dream, it's not like, oh, now suddenly this is fake. Everything is still real. You still have all the sensations, all the feelings, the cognitive mind, all the ability that you have when you're in your waking state. It blows my mind that people don't that they don't think more about what the nature of dreams happens to be. Like, it just doesn't get talked about as much as you would think. I mean, it's very strange that we are these supposed biological creatures that just lay down every night and just go into like a motionless, like we have to just sit in the dark for hours and hours and we have like dramatic adventures and it's just not in the same reality that we wake up to. I mean, it's a very strange thing.
But dude, even like my dog dreams, like a lot. I'll be working and like my dog lays behind me because I work from home currently. And he lays behind me and just chills. And like once in a while, man, I'll hear some like really weird sounds coming out of him. And I look back and he's asleep. His face is all moving. He's like running in his sleep and stuff. It's just so strange that conscious beings have these dreams. And it's hilarious when you can see them sort of melt their way into like this physical reality.
Yeah, it's that's hilarious. I don't understand. I mean, to me, I think that the nature of your dream is the same as the nature of reality. I mean, it's undeniable. I mean, if you especially when you start to lucid dream, you see it's the same thing. There's no difference, except there's a different rule set or your abilities change. Sometimes your abilities don't change as much. Like I've had lucid dreams where I'm unable to do certain things. It's not full God mode. I had other lucid dreams where I'm literally just like Neo in the Matrix. Like I'm the only one that knows I'm in the dream and I can do things that nobody else can do. It's interesting, but I don't know. To me, I think if it's so indistinguishable from reality, why don't people take that more seriously? I don't know.
Well, I mean, again, we live in this paradigm where there's so many binaries and so many dualities, and we think that because this is our default waking state, that it's the only one that's valid. And I understand that to a point, and I agree to a point because I believe that any experience that you have that exists outside of your reality, like outside of this everyday waking consciousness, no matter how you have the experience, no matter what the experience is, I think if the experience does not inform the way that you conduct yourself in this default waking reality, then may as well not even have had the experience. So I do understand why people put so much value on this because like in their default mode where there is value, everything that exists outside of that is undervalued. I agree with you. I think that there's so much to learn and so much to integrate from psychedelic experiences, from meditative experiences, from dreams, and that's what we have to do. We have to analyze these experiences and these situations as an important part of our growth and development in our normal waking state.
See, I think that most of these things don't get taken as seriously mainly because of what we've been talking about or what we started with is the mind body duality. Um so when people are sleeping, they think that they're having a dream in their brain. That it's just like the chemicals in their brain creating, you know, a dream scenario, whatever. But if you transcend that duality into just mind as mind being all, then you understand that the dream is literally as real as this, the same as the psychedelic experience. It's there's no rating on, this being real and that not being real. When it's happening, it's real. And even if you're a physicalist, like a materialist scientist, you have to admit that a psychedelic experience is real then. Because if your brain is just if your reality is just the chemical soup of your brain, then this is just as much an hallucination as the psychedelic hallucination. Just change a little tiny chemical and your reality changes. But I don't subscribe to that. I believe that it's it is mind, that it's not matter. It's basically the way I would put it is God's dream.
And this is God's default dream, the one that is for us the default dream. And I don't think that that necessarily means that it's more or less real, but I think there should be an emphasis, and there is an emphasis on the fact that it's the default. You always come back to it. So I think that's why I say that I think that these extra ordinary experiences should inform the default, not be looked at as lesser or more than, not even more than, because a lot of people in our culture, because we're not used to this kind of thing, when we have an extraordinary experience, like a mystical type thing, we tend to even sometimes blow it out of proportion in a way where it's bigger than or more important than our default state. And in other cultures, indigenous cultures, they don't do that because they've grown up with these substances. They've grown up with ayahuasca and things like that. They've, been drinking it since they were 12. So it's an everyday part of their life. It's a they have a healthy balance of, the paranormal and the normal, so to speak.
Yeah, there's another duality.
Yeah,
And
it's
that
all dualities when we try to put it into words though,
because
right?
that transcends to, paranormal with a capital P, 'cause it's all, like, natural and supernatural. It's all the same. Yeah.
It's all happening.
I mean, I look at it a little differently. I mean, I get what you're saying, but the way I think about it isn't like, necessarily this is just a default reality. Um, it's just the moment. It's just the experience now. I don't know. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree that, that you wanna integrate your experiences into, like, your present moment in your life, and that's definitely important. But, it's weird when because you think about, time being nonlinear. It's just like I feel like it's a big illusion in a sense. It's, it's a big mind game, really. It's one big dream, and you won't always be dreaming this dream. That's the way I look at it, really.
I like that because that's like an evaluation of death, and it's the same type of thing we were talking about with the people who are on their deathbeds dying of cancer who get psilocybin and they instantly realize that death is not the end. And I think that's a sort of what you're saying is that after this default waking mode of consciousness switches off, who the hell knows what's next? But there is a next.
The way I see it is like it's the eternal now. So now will never stop. So you'll always be here now. Like it's always it's always all time and no time. It's like the same thing. It's just
It's the
it's
paradox that breaks itself down into the one.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite amazing. But I'm excited to have another psychedelic trip soon. We'll have to try that out sometime in the coming months or something.
Yeah, it's been a long time. I haven't taken a psychedelic in a while, so yeah, it's always nice to get back in there and reestablish that connection and remind yourself